What you're looking at here is a 2016 Jeep Wrangler. Known internally as the JK, over 1.5 million Jeep Wrangler JKs were sold here in the US alone. That makes this Jeep the second most popular model Jeep has ever made. And yet, this is one of the most hated Jeeps by Jeep purists. What's so funny is a lot of the same reasons that the old school people hate the Jeep Wrangler JK are the same reasons that made the JK so successful. You see, Jeep claims that this open top design dates back to 1941 with World War II. When the little Jeep returned from the battlefield, it was renamed the CJ, or civilian Jeep, and for the better part of 30 or 40 years, it remained relatively unchanged. In 1987, Jeep rebranded the model as the Wrangler. This generation was called the YJ and continued through 1995 before being replaced by the Wrangler TJ, which was replaced by the JK in 2007. Now let's look at some of those reasons that some of the old school Jeep people really didn't like the JK. For over 60 years before the JK, the Jeep was powered by primarily one legendary engine. Yeah, there were 4 cylinders, some V8s, even a V6 for a little while there. But the iconic engine under the hood of the CJ and the Wranglers were the straight 6s. But by the early 2000s, the 4-liter was looking a little bit dated. The basic architecture dated back to the 1960s. It certainly wasn't very fuel efficient, and by modern standards, it was about the length of a baseball field. Jeep needed a new solution, and that came in the form of a 3.8-liter V6. Introduced in the 2007 model year for the JK, it was a little bit of a dog, if we're being honest, and it quickly developed a reputation for burning oil. Yeah, not a good start to a new generation of Jeep. However, Jeep did fix it somewhat in 2012 with this engine. This is a 3.6-liter V6, still a V6, not a straight 6, much more reliable though, 285 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque. It's known as the Pentastar V6. Ultimately though, the biggest problem with both of these V6s is that they're kind of just a corporate engine, and especially the 3.8-liter. The JK quickly earned a reputation of having the heart of a minivan. And then came the styling. I mean, yeah, it still looked like a Jeep. It still had 7 slots across the grille. It was still very upright, still an open top convertible. But why was it so big, especially compared to the outgoing Jeep Wrangler TJ? And why was everything so chunky? And look at this, the turn signal's in the wrong place, and the grille is plastic, and it looks like a Jeep, but it doesn't feel like a Jeep. At least a lot of people thought. And then came the biggest issue of them all. Yeah, in the past, there had been extended wheelbase Jeeps, the Jeep Wrangler TJ Unlimited, for example, or perhaps the Jeep CJ6. But there had never been a 4-door Wrangler until Jeep showed this vehicle in 2006. And boy, did the Jeep people go crazy. You talk to a lot of the old school Jeep guys and they'll tell you that the last true Wrangler came and went with the Jeep Wrangler TJ in 2006. It was the last model with the straight 6. It was the last small 2-door Jeep available. And yet, the JK has absolutely demolished the TJ in terms of sales, and in my opinion, did the most for the Jeep and the Wrangler brand as a whole. You see, when Jeep unveiled the Unlimited Wrangler, people realized that a Jeep could be more than just a toy, a second or third car. A Jeep didn't have to have a terrible back seat and a cramped interior. You could take your friends and your kids out on the trail with you. You could take your Jeep to school every day. You could drive it to the mall on a weekly basis. You didn't need a primary driver. The Jeep could do it all. And a lot of Jeep people hate that because the JK quickly gained a reputation as a mall crawler. But what those people are forgetting is that the Wrangler Unlimited unlocked the Wrangler to a whole new breed of people that could experience what this Jeep had to offer, the open top fun and the off-road ability, and still be able to live with it on a daily basis. And that's what makes the Wrangler JK so special. Let's look at some of its details. Of course, if you still want that short wheelbase fun, you can have it in the JK like this two-door I have here. Now, if you've never been in a Wrangler, there are some weird things you'll notice right off the bat. First off, these door handles are pretty funky. This was a huge change for the Wrangler lineup. The TJ, the YJ, and all CJs had this funky little pull flap letterbox style door handle. This one is a grab style with a button, and you push it open and you'll notice it opens a little bit funky. That's because the door hinges are on the outside. These doors come off with just 2 bolts. It is pretty heavy though. This one has power windows, so they're a little bit awkward. If you get a 4-door, you have twice as many doors to take off. You'll also notice that there's these straps holding the door in place. There's nothing to hold the door in place if you're on a hill or if you're trying to get in a parking lot. It kind of just flaps and swings about. Now, by modern standards, these doors are also pretty thin. They do have crash protection in them. It is a modern vehicle. It's 2016, so you do need to comply to safety standards. But yeah, a little bit quirky if you've never been in a Wrangler. You will notice that on this door, there are some things you're missing compared to your average car. For example, there are no window controls on this door. There are also no mirror controls on this door, so all those controls are inboard. There's also no speaker in the door. There is this little net though, which is, well, it's pretty much useless. Anything you put in here always flaps around, and the holes in the net are just far too big. Now what this means is Jeep has had to get a little bit creative with where it puts a lot of these essential controls. For example, the window controls are here in the middle, and in this Jeep they're 1 touch down but not 1 touch up, and it's very awkward trying to hook your finger in there to get them up. If you had a 4-door unlimited JK, you'd have 4 sets of window controls, of course, for all 4 windows. Now it's worth noting that the JK is also available with roll-up windows in certain trims and manual mirrors. This one has power mirrors, which are located down here by your right knee. It's a little bit funky to get to, and it's kind of hard to see at night, but they're there, and if you need them, they do work. The speaker placement is a little bit funny too. There's a set of speakers down by your knee, there's some tweeters up on the dashboard, and then there's the sound bar, which is a really cool feature of a lot of Wranglers. Now the cool thing about the sound bar is you're playing music essentially into your ears, into your head, so you can listen to music pretty loud, but not have the entire world hear exactly what you're listening to. As I'm sure a lot of you guys out there know, the top comes off a Wrangler, and even on these JKs, the windshield folds down as well. And you can see that because there's this huge hinge right on the base of the windshield. However, it's a huge job on the JK. It takes upwards of 2 hours, in some cases 2.5 hours. There's a lot of bolts you have to take off. You'll notice all these exposed bolts on the outside of the Jeep that have to be undone. There's a bunch of stuff on the inside. It's just a mess. I wouldn't recommend it. On the new generation Jeep, the JL Wrangler, they've completely redesigned the system so it's easy to fold down. So if you want to fold down your windshield, get a TJ, a YJ, a CJ, or a JL, because the JK is not the right move. And if you've ever wondered what the bumps on the hood of a Wrangler are for, it's to rest the windshield on when it's in its down position. Same thing with the little loop. That's for a strap to hold the windshield in place. One really cool feature Jeep did here on the JK so that you're not missing any fun in the sun if you have a hardtop is what are called these freedom panels. So it really is a 3-piece hardtop. There's this large back piece in the rear that comes off with 6 bolts. It's pretty heavy. It's a little bit of a pain, but if you still want some fun in the sun, you can have it with the freedom panels. Here's how it works. There's a couple of latches here, and there's also a little screw knob in the back here that you have to take out, and then this whole roof panel just comes out. It's kind of like an old school T-top, and it allows you to really soak in some rays without having to take off the whole hardtop. Really cool feature. Now, of course, once you pull these panels off, the question is, where do you put these big awkward things? There is a supplied bag for them, but there's no real cubby in the Jeep to store these. If you have a 4-door unlimited with a larger trunk, it's pretty easy to just slap them back there, but on a 2-door, you kind of end up throwing them in the back seat and hoping for the best. Now there are a lot of different trims and versions of the Jeep Wrangler JK. They changed throughout the years, but there are luxury oriented versions like the Sahara, There are more affordable versions like the Sport. There's the off-roady Rubicon version. This one is called a Sport S, so it's not the very base model. The dashboard is very upright in this 2016 model, but there are some funny things, such as these round vents with these pretty cool looking surrounds that are very fake. They look like they should come off or do something cool. They're just plastic, and there's a lot of dark plastics in here overall, but basic radio, easy to read gauge cluster, and there's this big old grab handle. Now this handle here has been on Jeep Wranglers and Jeep CJs for decades and decades and decades and decades. It's known by Jeep people as the shoot bar, and it's meant for off-roading so that you can have something to grab onto when you're bouncing around on the trails, and it works really well. It's really cool, it's nicely integrated, and on this JK it says since 1941, which is when Jeep really was established. One of the other funny things about the interior of the JK is that there are far too many bins that hold far too little. Let me show you what I'm talking about. There's a bin here right by your right knee that is far too long, far too narrow, and far too shallow to hold anything but a pencil that is bound to fall out at any right turn. There is a little coin pouch next to the shifter, which is not nearly deep enough to hold a penny. There's also a little bin next to the cup holders, which is weirdly shaped, weirdly wide, but once again, it doesn't have any depth to hold anything of use. There's a cubby up here on the dashboard, which is pretty deep and is pretty large, except that anything you put in there will be baked by the sun. You also have a bunch of off-roady nets, one of which is in the doors that we talked about. Then there is my favorite net, which is right in front of the shifter. If you have a manual transmission like this one, you pretty much can't put anything in there because it'll hit the transmission stock. There's a pretty good size glove box and a pretty good size center console, but yeah, that's pretty much it. We should talk about this Jeep's manual transmission for a second, because the throws are laughably long. A lot of people hate this manual transmission in the JK. Kind of shakes around, and like I said, the throws are really long. I personally love it. It just makes this Jeep so unique to drive. It's so much fun. Makes you feel like you're piloting a little bit of a 1968 Peterbilt, but it's really easy to use, and it's a great transmission to learn on. Now there's also a fairly mundane 5-speed automatic available in these later JKs, and a fairly miserable 4-speed automatic available in the early JKs if you so desire. One thing about the interior that is surprisingly handy is what's called the sports bar. It looks like a roll cage, but I wouldn't want to have a serious rollover with a sports bar. Essentially, it is rollover protection, but you can hang these really nice aftermarket, or even in some case, accessory door handles on the sides here. And they're fully adjustable, so you can put them exactly where you want them. That's super nice. You can do the same thing in the back. There's also all sorts of accessories you can hang off of the pillars, such as fire extinguishers or extra bags. Cool stuff like that. When you try using the back seat of a JK, you quickly figure out why the 4-doors are so gosh darn popular. This is the worst entry to pretty much any back seat I've ever used, and it's not even the size, it's the way this seat works on this JK. So to fold it forward, there's a little lever, and then you pull it forward, and it hits the steering wheel, which is fine because you can get on the other side, there's a little bit more clearance. But the frustrating part is when I go to return it to its original position, the seat recline doesn't stay where it was, so then you have to get in and readjust it, and it's just a little bit of a pain. But getting back here is, well, it doesn't help that this one's higher than stock, and it's not ideal, especially if you're shorter. But once you're back here, yeah, it's actually not bad at all. Good amount of headroom and even a good amount of knee room. And I'm pretty tall. I'm like, oh God, I'm like 6'1", and my shorter friends have a real hard time with that. And then there is the trunk on a 2-door, which is, well, it's pretty much laughably small. You can, of course, fold these seats, and they even tumble, and you can remove them all together, but if you fold and tumble them, there's nothing to hold them in position. In fact, Jeep says you aren't supposed to drive with them folded or tumbled, so it's either up with a tiny amount of room like this, or removed altogether. So, yeah, not a brilliant design. And perhaps the coolest part of the Wrangler are just the sheer amount of configurations from the factory. You can get a 4-door unlimited Rubicon with leather and navigation. It'll be 50 grand when new, or you can get a tiny 2-door Sport with no air conditioning and roll-up windows. That would have cost you roughly $24,000 when new. So many configurations. For example, these flares here, you can get them black like this one. You can get them painted just like the top, and that's before we get to the aftermarket options. This generation Jeep Wrangler can be built in just about any way imaginable. Head designer Mark Allen over at Jeep really describes these like 1930s Ford hot rods back in the day. You can do just about anything imaginable with a Jeep Wrangler JK. For example, on this one, I've got a little bit of a lift. I've got some bigger, more aggressive off-road tires. I've got a winch in the front and these metal bumpers. But there's so much more you can do with these. People put Hemi conversions in them. People have done pickup truck conversions for them. Anything you can think of has probably been done on a Jeep Wrangler JK, and there are still thousands of options out there even though these are used. I think this has the biggest part availability of any Jeep Wrangler ever. So there you have it, the Jeep Wrangler JK. When it came out, it was far bigger than the versions it replaced. Yeah, it had 4 doors and the engine was a little bit of a minivan motor. But at the end of the day, it was far safer. It had the option of 4 airbags. It was far more efficient. It was far more usable on a daily basis. It drove better, but most importantly, it was better off-road, and it still retained that Jeep Wrangler heritage. The JK will be missed, but it will not be forgotten. The JL that replaces it has huge shoes to fill, and we'll see going forward just how well it does that. As always, I'm Tommy with the Fastlane Car. Be sure to stay tuned to tflcar.com for the latest and greatest in Jeep news, views, reviews, and all of the above. See you next time.